like to welcome you to another episode of the Brand Power Analysis. Today I have on
Bill Carter.
Hey Bill, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Zach. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
No problem. So let's just kind of start off by telling everyone a little bit about yourself, what you do for a living, and how you work with the athlete space.
Sure. My name is Bill Carter, and my primary role these days is acting as a name, image, and likeness, otherwise known as NIL, consultant and educator. And in that space, what I do is work with sports organizations, universities, high school athletic associations, and brands to understand, and in some cases capitalize on NIL, in some cases mitigate the impact of NIL. I like to say, Zach, that I'm not necessarily an NIL advocate, at least not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also not someone who thinks the sky is falling because NIL is a reality. And that's really not my role. My role is to help organizations manage NIL in the way that they see fit. In addition to my consulting practice, I also write a column called NIL Corner for Sports Business Journal. And finally, I teach what I'm proud to say was one of the first college courses in NIL. It's called NIL in College Sports, and I teach that across the street at the University of Vermont.
Beautiful. What department, what part of the university is your program in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't often get that question. So I developed the course, and I had a relationship with the University of Vermont previously. I've taught a class in sports entrepreneurship in the business school. So the short answer to your question is NIL is in the business school at the University of Vermont. Now, that's not always the case at some universities, but I really advocated for the course to be in the business school and not necessarily associated with the athletic department or another part of the university, because the way I'm teaching NIL is really intended not just for student athletes, though I tend to have a lot of student athletes in my classes. Maybe 25% of the students end up being student athletes. But I'm really teaching the course with sort of the 50,000-foot view of NIL's impact on college sports, and then maybe some things you'd want to know if you thought you wanted a career in college sports. Mm-hmm. So it's in the business school, and I love it. It's been an unbelievable experience for me, and I hope we've created some future NIL experts that will land somewhere in college sports.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that, because we work with college athletes and even professional athletes and sports related businesses. And so we have a lot in common in that. And one thing that I heard you say there is only about 25% of your students are really athletes. And so just to kind of give everyone kind of a spectrum, what other disciplines do you usually see, and they may not be disciplines, but you kind of know what I mean, but what other kinds of students do you see kind of taking this course?
Yeah. I'll use the term profile, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So all of my students have been juniors, seniors, or grad students. It's open to all. The class sizes at a place like University of Vermont are relatively small. So I teach only about 40 students, and that's by design. It's I'm closed in by space and time and those sorts of things. We have room for about 40 students in the business school, in the classroom where I teach. And so the profile is a business major. Some of them have identified already through their minors or a concentration that they want to go towards sports. Maybe they're going to enter into college sports athletic administration, or they want to enter some other part of the sports industry, teams, leagues, the agent business, sports marketing firms, and so forth. So I would say that when they arrive in my class, one is they've already had a couple of years under their belt in the business school. So when we're talking about general marketing or business concepts, they have a real good understanding, and we end up really just applying those to the athlete marketing and NIL space.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I agree with you. I think it should be in the business school. I think that there's just so much behind it in general. And as you know, it's such a Wild West kind of scenario right now with NIL that depending on the school, depending on the team, depending on the brand, and so there's so much that goes into it that I think a lot of people get intimidated by some things and then honestly tend to, how do I explain this? I feel like a lot of not just students, but I think because of the awareness and the education side of not understanding it, they tend to think that it's completely different than what it really is. And so with that said, and kudos on the sports journal. I've read a couple of your articles that they're great. So I appreciate that additional content you give out to the world. We'll definitely give our viewers a link to that when we post this. But what would you say is, for any of these kids in your class, any of these profiles, do you feel tends to be their biggest misconception around NIL in general?
Yeah. Well, I think it's such a great question. I promise I won't say that again. But
I try my best to give great questions.
I can only use that twice. I can only do that twice per podcast. I've now used it up. So I think that most students arrive in my class with the same misconception as high school students and their parents, as 75% of college student athletes and coaches, and believe it or not, administrators, particularly administrators maybe outside of the Power 5 schools, who have maybe been forced to pay less attention to name, image, and likeness. And the first general misconception is that its very definition. NIL is the right of publicity. It's not the right to endorsements. It's not the right to earn income. It is the right of publicity. And with that right of publicity, the student athlete can now do a number of NIL activities. And I think we've come to a place where that's really a defined term that means, 5 or 6 of the key activities: social media, camps, clinics, private instruction, licensing, endorsements, as in working on behalf of a brand. I'm probably leaving one out right now off the top of my head, but those are really the key NIL activities. And so when students arrive at my class, they tend to think that NIL is about endorsements, and the vision they have for endorsements is a pro sports style endorsement deal that involves a brand paying an athlete to maybe do something on social media, or maybe do something in a traditional 30-second ad, or do an autograph signing, or show up at a live event. And while some of that applies to the NIL space, it doesn't apply to more than maybe 1 or 2% at most of all college athletes. Most college athletes doing NIL are doing activities that don't look anything like the pro sports style version of an endorsement deal. They may be doing autograph sessions, but it's at a local business. Mm-hmm. They may do, an appearance, but it's at a local business. They are probably doing social media, but it's not necessarily in that social media influencer sense. It could be. It can also be some other things, which we may get into in this conversation. So I think that's the biggest misconception. I do a lot of research. I do, pretty large scale surveys every month. I've got a panel of 5,000 current college student athletes and about 1,000 high school prospects, those who intend to play at the next level. And when I do those surveys, I generally find out that about 75% of high school prospects can't give an accurate definition of what NIL is. 75%. Actually, about 65, 66% of college athletes can't give you a really accurate definition unless you're really grading on a curve. So my students arrive with the same misconceptions that the general public has. And the last thing I'll say about this, Zach, is the why. Why do they have this misconception? Because about 90 to 95% of all of the traditional media coverage of NIL focuses on what? College football, Power 5 quarterbacks, and those deals tend to be the ones that look most like traditional pro sport style endorsement agreements, endorsement deals. And the media largely ignores the other 90 to 95%, which is, all the other NIL activities by a lot of other athletes that you've never heard of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, what I always tell these college athletes, especially when they're in the middle of school, is that, because we always come at it from a personal branding side. Like that's what we do. We really help. We're a branding firm. We really try to help athletes find their why, and so we always kind of tell them, like, listen, like, that's probably why you have it in the business school is, it's kind of a business, you're kind of having this business and you have to understand the way business works. And a lot of these larger companies, of course, are going to go to the athletes that have just much more media coverage. I mean, that's just tends to how they go. And so, I mean, I even deal with a lot of retired athletes, and that's a little bit out of the NIL space, but that are looking for how to get started and how to push this stuff themselves that don't have as much techie kind of influence. And a lot of it comes back to what you said with the local businesses. It tends to be like, I mean, I think it's just like any business that starts up, start small and then grow, and so what would you say, out of a lot of these students that you work with, you say a lot of administrators, athletes, other companies, that people that may want to open a sports related business, what would you feel on a personal level that you tend to see a lot of them struggle with when it comes to trying to, grow their brand or grow personally as a person?
Yeah, I think the thing that I see the most frequently, and maybe the difference between success and failure most of the time, is around the student athlete's perspective of whether they want to be an entrepreneur, right? And that's what this is. NIL is a form of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And the product happens to be the student athlete's personal brand, but they are an entrepreneur. And so, let's take this out of college sports space or out of sports generally. We talk to entrepreneurs, like you look at successful ones, they, from a branding perspective, they understand, as you say, they understand their why, they understand, their intent, they really understand their customers, and they find a way to communicate to those customers about their intentions, or eventually their products and services or personal brand. So the number one thing that I see as a factor between success and failure is is the ability to see yourself as an entrepreneur and say, what do I have to do to build my own business, right? And it starts with the personal brand, and then the student athlete can determine how they're going to put that brand into action. Will they decide that they are in fact going to try to build a large social media following, and that's going to be where the direction they go? They really want to do social media influencer work, or are they going to use that personal brand to build the best camp or clinic or do private instruction in their sport? And these are sort of obviously very different places on the NIL activity spectrum. I'm just using those as example, but you can't do anything successfully in NIL if you don't have your own personal brand. This is not going to sound very sexy, but straightened out. It doesn't have to be perfection, but it's got to be clear. What do you stand for? Who's your audience? How are you going to communicate to them? And I'll say another thing, Zach, sorry to be so long-winded on this answer, but you mentioned lack of time a few minutes ago. I mean, if you think pro athletes don't have a lot of time, talk to college athletes. It's somewhere between 5 and 7 hours of their week is not already accounted for. So between they're taking a full class load and participating in practice, games, eating, sleeping, all at the end of the day, they've got about 5 to 7 hours. So a week. And so the clearer they are in understanding their brand, the better off they're going to be when they determine which of the NIL paths in terms of activities they're going to pursue. If they're fumbling around with their brand, they're certainly going to be fumbling around trying to figure out NIL opportunities and activities. And it's just not a recipe for success. The very last thing I'll say on this topic is, you're largely in the business of like I would say a sophisticated branding model. You're not trying to knock out a brand in an afternoon. Like you're going through a real process and figuring things out over time. And that's really the sort of the gold standard, that approach. The student athletes are not, there just is not really enough time to go to that level. Now, hopefully later in their life, maybe upon graduation, maybe they're a pro athlete, maybe they're starting their career, maybe they're in technology, whatever it is, there's a time for them to get to that gold standard level of figuring out their personal brand. But in the short term, they've got to keep it simple, keep it short, as long as it's clear and unique. And then they're in a decent spot.
It's funny that you say that, because I 100% agree with you. College athletes, I mean, a lot of the college athletes that come to me, funny enough, and they'll ask me questions and they'll be like, I'm having such a hard time figuring out, and this isn't just for athletes. I mean, this happens for a lot of college students, having such a hard time figuring out what they want to do with their life. And I mean, I think you and me can both preach on this, that, it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, I think utilizing the grit scale is a good example of that. Find something that you really want to do 10 years from now, and then, kind of dive it down, and you'll get to where you want to go. If you get into marketing, great. If you get into business, great. From a college perspective, you'll find your path, and your path will grow to where you want. And your mindset, you are going to have mindset shifts. Your purpose is going to change. It's going to evolve and things of that nature. So it's okay. And one thing that you said that really hit on me was just starting, because it's true. When college athletes come to us, I don't go and preach the gold standard. Like that's, I just know that they have no time. I know it would be a huge investment for them. And so I know they don't really have that income coming in to make that 100%. And so, you know, you'll get a lot of them that come to me and they're like, either their parent or someone they know will be like, oh, we developed a website, we created all these shirts, we did all the tangible stuff. And I have to go,
Right.
whoa, like, are you sure that's really what you want to do? And if you do, you are going to have to pick that direction and go with it. Even professionals and I see from even a website perspective and their brand perspective, they're all over the place. They have like 8 businesses going on within one overall brand. And as you said, kind of just pick a direction and kind of try it out, give it some time, invest in it a little bit. And yeah, in 3 to 4 months, if you've done that commitment and you feel like it's not um a suitable thing of what you want to do, then shift. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. It's interesting. You're also making me think as you're describing some of that, that's what makes student athletes um, so successful in terms of career in a lot of ways, which is they learn something as student athletes that they have the opportunity to learn something as student athletes that maybe a lot of the general student body doesn't have the opportunity to learn. Now, they may learn it through other means, but I think many student athletes, and I'm going to sort of steal from, the way that UConn basketball coach Gino Armietas describes it, which is that great athletes don't get tired. Like that the mindset is that great athletes never, ever, ever get tired, right? And so when they're playing a good competitor, when that competitor gets tired, then the great athlete, capitalizes on that. Just never get tired. And I think student athletes learn this like through the grind of practice for 4 years, through the grind of being tired and then still needing to go study and wake up early for practice or wake up early for an 8 a.m. class because that's the only time you can take a class and still get to practice on time. Those sorts of things. I mean, all those things, we can refer to as grit. I almost simplify them down to an even more basic level, which is like just learning to have a mindset that you will not get tired. And so I think part of that lends itself to being able to, get your career started and persevere through, those first number of years that can be sort of choppy as you're trying to figure things out and still have a lot of success.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's one thing that I try to preach to. I mean, I'll get to, I'll talk to some athletes that are professional, getting ready to retire, or they have retired, and they're just like, I just don't know where to start, and and I have to look back and I have to pump them up a little bit and say, listen, like, look at everything that you have done. Like, people want to hear that message. Like, people want to hear that. What else do you like to do that is combination with you know that those qualities that you've developed over the years? And you're right, like, they do kind of have a leg up, especially becoming entrepreneurs, because they've learned that grit and perseverance that honestly a lot of business owners don't really start to have to develop until they start the business. And so many athletes have these leadership skills, for instance, of working with the team and working with coaches and developing a game plan and working together, that I see a lot of business owners take years to develop. Leadership is a great quality. I'll use that as that's probably a really great example of something that athletes can really take advantage of as they continue to develop their career.
Yeah, 100% agree. 100% agree.
So What other things are you doing right now? Like, what kind of do you talk a lot in your course about personal branding? Do you focus a lot on the financial side, on the marketing side, on the branding side? What kind of stuff do you have in your curriculum, if
Yeah,
you're
and
allowed?
yeah, I'll even widen it out. Each curriculum that I develop is obviously somewhat unique to the audience. And there's some things I prioritize in some and deprioritize in others. But I'll sort of give you sort of a quick look at several of them. So there's the curriculum that I do at the University of Vermont, which focuses really on everything related to NIL, from policy and governing bodies to student athlete activities and collectives, and the role of professional service providers and the role of marketplaces, all those things we touch on week by week. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to have a lot of guest speakers who tend to be the founders of a lot of the brands that are already sort of central to the NIL space. And it's a great forum for them to be able to talk to students, but it's still private, and we can really open up and talk about a lot of things. So the curriculum at the university is I would say sort of all encompassing. But I also do a lot of speaking through workshops and webinars. Some of those are public, meaning anybody can sign up for them, and some of those are private, custom. So I'm hired by a league, a team, a state high school association, or a university specifically. And Zach, when I go into those, I'm obviously thinking of the curriculum that is best suited for, say, a high school athletic association in a particular state. And so there's a set of things that they too need to understand, but it might be a variation of it. And I'll give you one example. So, and I'll use the high school space because maybe the easiest, which is, sure, we need to talk about state laws and the potential for federal legislation and what the NCAA's rules are, even that high school students should understand. But there are things like that look very similar from the high school to the college space, which would be the NIL activities themselves and what the data says most student athletes are doing. But there are elements that are, say, already critically important in the college space that are really just sort of red flags at this point for the high school space. An example of one of those would be the idea of collectives, right? So boosters, alumni who raise large sums of money and then go directly to the student athletes at the institution that they want to support, and they develop NIL deals to support those athletes, right? That's something that is now widespread at the college level. There are over 200 collectives in the US doing NIL deals. Well, there's only 300 Division I schools, right? So roughly, so the collectives are pervasive. They're playing an important. They have a lot of impact in NIL. Well, that's something that on the surface you'd say, well, there's no such thing as a high school collective. Why would you talk to high school parents and athletes and high school administrators or athletic associations about that? And the reason is because it's very likely to come, that we need to be able to look at what happens in the college space, draw conclusions about what will likely happen at the high school space in 24 to 48 months. And so there's a lot of that goes on in terms of, and your question was really about curriculum. I like my curriculum to have just three things. One, I want it to be absolutely relevant to the audience. I don't want to talk about stuff that doesn't matter to them. Number two, I want it to be based in fact. And that's a big thing for me. That's why I spend a lot of time and frankly, a lot of money developing a data set that I can share in my work. There are a lot of talking heads in NIL. Some of them are very good. Some of them have really great backgrounds, doing interesting work. There are a lot of others that, frankly, I don't think are offering a lot to the conversation. And I think by using facts and data and insight, I'm able to maybe push some parts of the conversation forward, and it's not all just an opinion piece. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is I like to include in my curriculum some stuff that's sort of future facing, that I can use data and insight that we see, in the current state of things, but I can say, if this continues to happen, it's going to look like this 1 year from now, right? And a sort of an easy example of that would have been, when California and New York and a few others were the first states to permit high school NIL, I sort of recognized it was happening at a pace, really ended up being 1 to 2 states per month were flipping from prohibiting high school NIL to permitting high school NIL. And I think, like, sort of recognizing that and seeing some of the data that was coming back, we can now say, well, the whole country's going to permit NIL with probably within another 12 to 18 months. I mean, I think that's part of it, just being able to look a little bit into the future and make some educated guesses to maybe help certain cohorts prepare for what's to come.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, 24 months. I mean, yeah, I get questions all the time when parents in particular are like, hey, does this high school over here allow me to do NIL, or does this college allow my son or me to do NIL? And I have to be like, I don't know, man. It's just, you just don't know. Yeah, it's so what do you see the impact being? What do you see the impact being from a positive standpoint when it comes to, we'll just say, high schools starting to enable NIL?
Well, I think the positive starts with just, I think, fairness, right? I think for those who advocate for NIL for high school athletes, I think it begins with an argument of fairness. If there's a 16-year-old who lives, in the middle of the country, doesn't play a sport, but chooses to go to work 3 or 4 times a week at a part-time job after school and on the weekends to earn income, he or she has, of course, the right to do that, around, sort of state laws around age and those sorts of things. But he or she has a right to go do that. As currently constructed in about half the states in the US, a student athlete could do some kinds of work, a high school student athlete, that is, could do some kinds of work after school and on the weekends, but not other kinds of work, not work that is actually related to their sport. And given, and we've now talked about this, for a little while in this discussion, given their sort of expertise in that sport, why would we step in and prohibit them from taking advantage of the opportunity to earn income related to something that they love, that they're passionate about, and that they have some expertise in, which is their sport, right? That's the argument for sort of just fairness, right? Allowing all students in high school opportunities to do whatever they want, within the law, of earning income. I think that's the first real positive, and that's why I think eventually we will get to all 50 states and Washington D.C. Who, in terms of permitting NIL. And I think there are other reasons to advocate for NIL. I think they tend to be sort of relatively small and on the margins. So I tend not to make these arguments, but I'll just bring one of them up because it will be the one that is largely covered in the media, which is part of that fairness is also not prohibiting that 1 or 2% of the athletes in high school that could make a tremendous amount of money. We haven't talked a lot about we haven't talked at all about compensation in our conversation yet, but a handful of athletes in high school will make a tremendous amount of money doing NIL. And we ought not, the argument would go, we ought not prohibit that from occurring, right? That doesn't seem fair. But on the compensation note for a second, for most high school athletes, by far the majority, 95% plus, the compensation that they'll earn through NIL activity is going to be sort of similar to a part-time job, right? Doing a social media post for a local business, they're probably going to get in the neighborhood about $65. That's what the data says. So it'll take them, as you know, I mean, you're in the business. That doesn't take 5 minutes, right? There's work that goes in prior to them developing the content, posting the content, following up with and engaging their fans and followers around the content, following up with the brand to get paid and have a conversation about the success or failure of the campaign. All of that, the data that I collect shows that each one of the social media posts that a student athlete does on behalf of a brand takes about 3 hours. Well, if they get paid $65, they got paid $20 an hour. That's great. You and I would have loved that in high school, getting paid $20 an hour, right? But it's not thousands of dollars. It's not millions of dollars. And by the way, it took real time. It's an actual job. And so I think all that, I tie all that, though, to the positives. It's good in most cases, not all, but it's good in most cases that student athletes have the opportunity to do this kind of work with a lot of guardrails that are too long a list to get into right now.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to get into the negatives too much. I mean, because it's all about being positive, but I mean, I think that, it's going to be very similar to, I mean, I just in society in general. I mean, I think that in the business world, for instance, you see so many people out there right now saying how to make $1 million tomorrow, even now, how to make $1 billion tomorrow. And you see all these influential people making it. But I think that a lot of people don't understand that that's the 1 of the 1% when it comes to business, even, professional athletes, it's very similar with their endorsement deals. There's very few that actually, and those are the ones you hear about, and so I think that it does somewhat start pushing younger students, even college students and high school students, to somewhat be fearful and not judge, but what's the terminology I'm trying to think of? Just really not feel like they're doing good enough because they hear about that 1%. And I think that that's something that will really need to somewhat be touched upon as NIL continues to move forward, because as you said, it's 1% will do that, and good for them. They worked hard to probably get there. People don't see how hard it is, to get there. But there are going to still be ways that these student athletes can learn and grow. And I think that's really what it all comes down with. It is the journey, is it's a stepping stone and a journey evolution of themselves as they continue to evolve.
You're reminding me, Zach, of and it wasn't related to NIL and it wasn't even related to college sports, but you're reminding me of an important lesson that as an adult I was reminded of about 10 years ago. Where I went to college, I went to Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania, and they started an entrepreneurship sort of institute program that students from campus could join in and be taught lessons on entrepreneurship, which all led to the opportunity to submit a proposal to start a business and be awarded, anywhere from $5,000 to I think $20,000 to actually get their business started. And I was, because I had started at that point a few businesses, and I was asked to be on this, panel of alums that would choose the businesses that would be awarded money and so forth, and then act as a mentor. And I remember there was one proposal that a lot of the other people on the panel, the other alumni, were very excited about. And it had to do with selling college textbooks. And at the time, I was doing a lot of work for Amazon. And Amazon has its own college business, textbook business. And I saw this proposal as essentially like, this is not a good business idea. Like, this person has not vetted what else is out there. And frankly, this business idea, were it to go out into the real world, would be crushed within a couple of months, right? And so I began to be sort of negative in this private setting in talking about this proposal with this group of alumni. And at the end of it, as we were sort of getting up and we were talking about all the proposals, and as I get up and I'm walking out the door, this sort of older entrepreneur walks over to me and very, very kindly says, "You're missing the point." He says, "Of course it's not a great idea. Of course this person's going to fail. But there's enough here for us to reward him with the opportunity to go out and try to figure some things out and ultimately fail, and probably do that a few times, because by his third business, he's probably going to be really good at this and come up with something great," right? And I think, that was a great reminder of, that it really wasn't about trying to find, a 21-year-old who had developed the next idea to compete with Tesla, right? It was more about building a foundation of what an entrepreneur would really need to know to be successful someday, probably long after we ever had met them. And so I feel a lot of ways about that's similar with NIL. I think it's great that so many college athletes are involved in NIL. I wish even more would examine it and determine if they want to pursue it. Many of them will not be successful. It doesn't matter, right? Because the lessons along the way around mainly entrepreneurship, but some other things, are a reward in the effort. And by the way, many will be successful, but I think it's all about the effort, which is absolutely worthwhile.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. That was to the heart a little bit, because I see that you're 100% right. And I think no matter what, as not even student athletes, but I think as all as humans, no one wants to fail, but you do have to look back multiple times in your life. I mean, even multi-million-dollar business owners, $50 million a year business owners, like I've seen a few that still go through a lot of the same troubles, that we go through, just from a much more larger perspective. And it all comes down to being able to understand and know that, the failures you're going to have to fail to succeed. I mean, the failures are what help you succeed in life.
Absolutely. And the great news about NIL is that most of the time, the failures are not, great failures, right? Mm-hmm. They're in the context of that same person, still earning their degree, playing a sport that they love. And this is really just an add-on to an already great experience that they're having.
Yeah. I'll finish it off with the last question because this is something that I was you kind of talked about at the beginning, and we kind of dabbled on it a little bit with the personal branding side. Um, One thing that we really try to work with athletes is, especially with, you know, you said you work with you work with a lot of collections and a lot of brands as well, especially local businesses, and kind of understanding how NIL works. Um, and I know we talked about endorsements, sponsorships, and that's about what 95% of them think about. But where I'm going out with this is we kind of talked a little bit about voice and tone and what they want to do. So I love to hear your thoughts on how the athletes can find their genuine path and, you know, honestly just know that they can say no to brands that don't fit who they are as a person. And I think that's something that a lot of, I think, college and now coming high school athletes will have to worry about because, in a sense, they are kind of clients at that point. And so you do step into the spectrum of possibly working with some people that could take advantage, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, I think again for the going back to something we talked about before about maybe simplifying the process and that being an avenue for success. I'll use a sort of a concrete example, which is I'll ask a student athlete, what what do you want to be aligned with? What do you care about? And before you answer that, let me put it into real terms. What would you not get sick of posting about on social media 3 times this week? Now, 3 times a week, every month for the next 2 years. What are you not going to get sick of? Because you care about it, you're passionate about it, you think it's interesting and dynamic and changing for whatever reason. What's the thing that you're not going to get sick of posting about? And somebody will say to me, and I had this like I can't tell you who, but a starting point guard in the Big East women's basketball, and she said, "Mental health. It's not, not an unusual answer these days. I really care about mental health." I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I applaud you that is really a passion of yours. That you have an interest in that, and so let me frame it to you this way about brand partnerships and monetizing maybe social media or other parts of NIL. If this is going to be the primary, maybe not exclusively, but if mental health is primarily what you're going to stand for, it's going to be what you post on social media, whether you're being paid by a brand or not. It's going to be what you talk about when you have the opportunity to speak in public as your passion and so forth. If that is the case, within a year, if you stick to this as your primary message, you will attract the brands and people and organizations to you, and they are likely to be great brand partners because they're going to have had a year's worth of listening to you and where you stand. And it doesn't have to be more complicated than that
Mhm.
for a student athlete. And frankly, I don't think it can be more complicated than that because of the barriers and challenges we've talked about previously around time and other commitments. I think it can be that simple.
I 100% agree with you. It's so it's funny because I feel like when we talk to a lot of our athletes, the same things come up, the same kind of challenges come up, and I kind of tell them the same thing. It's hey, really, your personal brand can really just be about what you're passionate about. Mix your passions together, and if you know that you can consistently post about that on a normal basis, those brands will be attracted to you because they will have the same audience as you. So they will find you and they will want to work with you. And in turn, from a higher level, really they are businesses. Their main goal is to, get sales or to grow what they're doing. And so they want to bring on people that have the same brand message as them, really what it comes down to. Um, That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Well, I think you and I could talk about this all day. I do really appreciate you being on. I thought this was a great conversation. I think that this is definitely something very needed. Kudos on the class. Kudos on everything that you're doing with Sports Journal. I'll continue to keep reading your articles as I provide more content on the subject. And why don't you tell everyone where they could possibly find you? And if they want to reach out to you, what would be that best method?
Yeah. So everything I do is on one website, which is studentathleteinsights.com. No hyphens in there, just the word studentathleteinsights.com. And there you'll be able to read about what I do from a consulting standpoint, what I do in terms of education and workshops and all things NIL. There's also a blog on the site called NIL Insider, and I probably have the last 20 to 25 blog posts that tend to include monthly survey research, so that you might find interesting. And you can reach out to me through the website or through email, which is bill@studentathleteinsights.com.
Oh, beautiful. And don't worry, I'll also put those down in the comment section so everyone can click down and view it. Well, again, I want to thank you for being on another episode of the Brand Power Analysis. And this won't be the last time we talk. We'll keep in contact. And again, I appreciate you being on.
Yeah, Zach, thanks for having me, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you.